Thank you. So, for many of us, Sloan is something we undertake when we're trying to start to change the direction of our career or the direction of our life. And what's really difficult is trying to work out how to actually do that. And whilst many people will say, oh yes, Sloan was a turning point for me, when you're actually going through the process, it's really difficult to work out what to do. So I'm hoping in this next session that two Sloans who've really transformed themselves since the era before they took the programme are going to be able to give us some input and some ideas on how they made that transition. I'd like to introduce Gillian Keegan. Gillian is the Member of Parliament for Chichester, elected in May 2017. However, if we go back a little bit, Gillian at 16 was in Huyton in Merseyside, which for the non-Brits is one of our less salubrious areas, and started as an apprentice in the car factories. She built herself a very successful business career from that starting point through various sort of software type companies, but came into Sloan in 2010 thinking around wanting to do something different. Our second guest is Valeria Vescina, who is an author, critic and literary tutor. But again, Valeria started life in Brindisi in southern Italy, and originally followed the much more traditional investment banking career path, and came into Sloan as a young mother of two, wondering how to try to work out how life would work from then on. So if I can start with Gillian, can you tell us a little bit about how you went about finding a career path after Sloan and some of the ideas and thoughts that you went through?
Yes, sure. I mean, first of all, when I came on Sloan, I didn't actually intend to switch careers. Actually, it was the first time I'd ever studied full-time. I'd always done my first degree and everything else part-time. So I kind of, as I made money, I thought I deserved this year at university that everybody gets, or normally people get 3 years. So that was actually one driver. The second driver was, and it gives you more time and space to think. You know, there'd been a kind of digital transformation. Businesses had changed, business models had changed, and I also wanted time to think about that. Plus, I was at the stage in my career where I thought I just needed to think about how to be the most effective leader I could be. But all the time, I was still thinking about that in the context of where I was, in a corporate, multinational business kind of career. Whilst I was here, I started to think differently. Because I think I've been trying to think about, you know, what's the phrase I would use, but it made me constantly curious being here, and it gave me the frameworks to think about many bigger things, I think, you know, bigger problems in life or bigger things that need solving, and it just made me a lot more curious about things. And then I did attend a lecture where it was actually Professor Linda Gratton, who didn't teach us, she just came in for a guest lecture, and she said, you know, she talked about the future of work and this concept of having 2, 3, I mean, you've just heard Lord Burns on his third, you know, 3 careers, 2, 3, 4 careers, and that kind of gave me permission to start to think, what would a second career be? And once I started to think about that, I was going down a different route.
And Valeria, what about you? You sort of, again, started post-Sloan, I think even still in relatively similar activities. What was your thinking process?
That's right. For me, the Sloan Fellowship showed that, in fact, there were some constants even in the work I had done in investment banking. I had really always worked on the strategy side for clients. And when I came onto the Sloan Programme, I chose all the electives to do with strategy and organizational behavior. But on Sloan, I also discovered much better how my own mind functioned and how I functioned in teams. And one of the things I discovered was that essentially I was very creative, but also very structured. And so what I looked for in my next line of work was still in the city, a way of using the frameworks I had learned of strategy, organizational behavior in my next roles. And so I went at first into financial public relations and then into executive search, where I specialized fundamentally in recruiting chief executives. And I enjoyed that work very much, and it's, I think people don't realize to what extent you can actually be creative in that work. But then I found that in fact the work-family balance didn't work very well for us, and I took a break. And during that break I explored writing, which again had been a constant, of course, if you've always been doing strategy type work. And explored it, and finally it led to an MA and then to more.
So tell us a little bit more about how you went about getting new skills, or almost developing more strongly skills that you had in your previous career.
Sure. Right. When I decided that writing was the thing, and I was actually going for a literary career as such, if you can call it a career, because I'd say it's more of a vocation, frankly. I decided that the learning curve was actually steep. A lot of people think that if they write well, they could write a book. And it's not quite like that. So I had seen on Sloan how much you can learn through a master's degree in a very, very intensive way. And I fundamentally did the same thing with writing. I went and did a very, very good MA in creative writing, a 2-year MA. And that developed my writing skills, certainly. And then I developed the literary criticism part of my work and the opera criticism part of my work. Because I also speak a couple of languages, and so I review European fiction and opera, because I've always done music, and particularly actually opera singing all along, believe it or not, my even investment banking career. So yeah.
And Gillian, when we met, you talked me through this wonderful way in which you'd gone around trying to reskill or retool yourself. Can you sort of take us through how you came to the decision to get into politics, and how you go from being a business person to being a politician?
Well, first of all, I wasn't nearly as structured as Valeria. I kind of stumbled on the path. And I think one of the lessons I've really learned is never underestimate the power of randomness. And it really is something that, you know, as long as you're open to it. So I'd gone back into the corporate world. It was a great job. I was kind of flying around the world, taking the traditional sort of 150 flights a year. I was kind of enjoying it. But it wasn't that much different from what I'd already done. More money, a bit more money. That was useful, but not much different. So I went to the theatre in London. Actually, that was unusual, because my husband and I managed to be in London at the same time and go to the theatre. And it was a political play called The Audience. Anyway, whilst I was there, I met a guy that I'd worked with in Tokyo years and years and years before. And he was with somebody who their kids had gone to the same school. And we started chatting in the interval over a glass of champagne. And it turned out that this somebody he was with was somebody called Baroness Anne Jenkin, who had set up something called Women2Win with someone called Theresa May. And I was talking to this person, and she said, "Have you ever thought of becoming a member of Parliament?" And I kind of said, no, not really. I mean, what kind of person wakes up in the morning and thinks, you know what I want to be? A member of Parliament. You know, we just spent a fortune on a business education, just kind of, you know, thought of all the things you can be in the business world and take the business world by storm, and suddenly someone asks you to start something completely different. But I was curious enough, so I went along to the House of Lords, actually, to the tea room there, and had a cup of tea with her. And she started to talk to me about what that was. And actually, I started to get really interested in the role and actually this kind of this completely different world that I didn't know anything about apart from, you know, I was political. Actually, I was a Conservative from Knowsley, which is very unusual for anyone who knows Knowsley. So I was political. I had thought about politics, obviously voted, but I'd never been involved in politics or even thought about doing it as a career. Anyway, so I kind of was very excited by it, and then the reality dawned that actually none of the skills that I developed actually were that much use in the political world. For example, some of them were transferable, as Lord Burns says, but for example, you know, in the corporate world, you control lots more things. You have the strategy, you can hire and fire people, you can put the incentives in place to get people to behave how you want. In the political world, you have people who are volunteers, who are giving up their time, who have to want to help you to get elected. You are going to get elected by voters who you definitely can't control, and you have to find very many ways of trying to speak to. And to get selected by the party, they want people who have kind of shown that they can do all the things that they expect you to do. You need to prove your resilience. So you need to have stood for election many times and failed many times, because that proves that you're resilient. You need to have, or stupid. You need to have campaigned a lot, because that proves you've got the humility to actually go from every, you know, even the Prime Minister will be out in her trainers, going from door to door, asking people, will they please vote for her? Delivering a leaflet with your face on, that's a big thing to get over. Driving around the street, watching your face on a poster, usually with glasses and other stuff adorned and worse. And all of these things are things that you don't prepare for in the business world. Having a Wikipedia page, being a public figure, having people abuse you on Twitter, all of these things you have to get used to. So I basically, because I started my career as an apprentice, I basically used this, and that had served me very well. And I thought I'll use the same approach. So I picked up all the things. I wrote an apprenticeship to be an MP. Nobody else had done one, so I thought I'd better do the first one. So that involved me becoming a local councillor, being on the board of the National Health Service near where I lived. I knew nothing about the National Health Service apart from being born into it and having one stitch on one finger once. So I had no experience. So, you know, at least understanding how these organisations work. I stood for election 3 times in 7 months. I lost one of those, actually. 2 of them I did win, the local councillor ones. And I basically just threw myself into campaigning, volunteering. I volunteered in Parliament 1 day a week to figure out what that was all about, tried to build networks, etc. And I spent three and a bit years, just over 3 years. I was expecting to spend longer, but then the snap election was called, and that then is just the luck of the draw.
And I think it's fascinating the way you've both actually had to go and start building new skills in order to take yourselves in the next direction as well. And you've put yourselves in very different environments. I mean, again, Valeria, how did you go about building yourself some networks in this arty world of writers and critics and things?
Okay. I'm struck by the mix, in fact, that you've highlighted of the randomness, and then, in fact, actually a very structured way of going about, you know, what is it I need to learn, who is it I need to meet, and so forth. And I think that's important, because whatever career transitions people make, you have to be open to the serendipity of things. I'd say it's probably more, serendipity, but which means creating, of course, opportunities as well. And the networks are part and parcel of that. So in my case, certainly, the MA created a very, very helpful network, and it's been helpful at a very practical level, even in terms of getting feedback as I was writing my novel. So I've had the feedback of some amazing authors, some extremely well known, some people who did the MA with me. And for example, my writing group has been going now for 5 years, and we're all graduates of the same MA. Now, that is a very, very helpful network to have. because it means you're actually getting that input. It means that when you contact other writers whom you don't know to ask them for an endorsement, they say, well, this is someone who's taking things seriously. And so that network kind of creates a secondary network, if you imagine it as layers. So that's been helpful. But another thing is that, like you, I did volunteering in things that I was passionate about. You know, the arts are really something you have to be passionate about, because let me be plain, there's very little money in it. Okay? So you don't do it for the money, let's be clear. So I had volunteered for literary charities, and I had worked for three boroughs, including the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, teaching creative writing. And then, because I also do opera criticism because of my other background there, I ended up getting asked to join the board of a very grown-up arts festival of words and music. So, you know, all of these are networks that end up reinforcing each other. They're really mutually reinforcing. So, yeah, hope that helps.
And Gillian, for you, what new networks did you need to create? And in the world of politics, how do you create them with people sometimes with such different interests to yourself?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's quite a broad range of networks, and just thinking about it now, so they range from the party activists, so you become a member of a party, and then you go along to the Conservative Party functions, and that is a whole different world, complete with at least 9 raffle prizes at every event. Most people will be much older than you, and it's basically like going out with your grandparents and their friends all the time. But, you know, you do learn a lot. It's a key network, and if you think you want to skip that bit out, this job is not for you, because you spend a lot of time in those networks and you get to appreciate them massively. I mean, you know, already this morning from those networks, I've had very in-depth, thorough and very educated views about what happened at Chequers yesterday. You know, so you know, you do get a lot of people with a lot of experience who are there, and they're there to help you. Then, obviously, I had a lot of women's networks as well, actually, because I found them very useful. There's a lot of groups trying to encourage more women to go into politics, because it's kind of somewhere that not many women really self-select for. So, you know, they were very useful. Here, London Business School, I came back to the reunion. I can't remember what it was. I think it might have been the 5th reunion of Sloan, and it was in the Natural History Museum. And we were there just having a drink with lots of my colleagues. And there in front of me was, she just walked past me, was Justine Greening, who I think was the Secretary of State for Education at that point, or she could have been International Development, but she's done both jobs. And I plucked up the courage, as you do, to go and kind of ask her why she was there. And she had done an MBA a few years before. And I said to her, I've just come back. I've just lost an election up in Merseyside. As a Conservative, that wasn't very surprising. But I just stood in my kind of home seat. And she was absolutely amazing. She said, my God, you know, come in. She spent hours and hours preparing me for the selection, because you have to speak a different language to get through the selection process. And there's many different networks and many different audiences with, you've kind of got the same messages because it's you, but you've got to tailor your message very, very different for different audiences in the political world. And that's a skill that you need to immerse yourself in, because you don't know what you're solving for. And there's lots of people who want to help you.
I'm now interested about what it is in both of you that's enabled you to make such a fundamental transition, because it's not that easy. You know, if you look, and I certainly hear resilience out of both of you, whether it's the resilience to go through elections and fail, or the art of sending your script out until your first book gets published. maybe if I start with you this time, Gillian, you know, what do you think are the traits that you've needed to show to reroute your career so dramatically?
I think I changed fundamentally how I view failure. So beforehand, I was always worried about failing. I was always, you know, I've had to always create my own financial independence. So I was always, you know, quite risk averse, and, you know, I did worry about failing and going back and failing. So I think I just changed completely how I view failure. I didn't view trying something. You know, I think I bought a card for someone the other day which said something like, success is just one more try after failing, and that's kind of what it is. It's just trying one more time after failing, and it's only if you're continuing to try that you'll continue to get anywhere. So I completely changed, and I saw it as more of a badge of honour and a battle-ready scar that would you know, enable you to go further, as opposed to something that you should be wary of.
I mean, that's what I love about you too. I mean, Valeria, how did it feel to keep fighting to get published and get there?
I just started from the beginning knowing that, you know, receiving rejections when your agent sends out your book to publishers is totally part of the process. And that you just have to hang in there, and someone will pick it up and say, oh my, this is totally for us, and you know, and others will say no. So I started knowing that, you know, getting published is very, very difficult, especially for literary fiction, which is what I do. So I expected it, but I think that yes, that is one aspect, the resilience and persistence. I'd say that even before that, it's something else that in fact Gillian earlier picked up on, and it's the humility. If you're going to start something different, if you're going to make a transition, you need that humility of recognizing that what strengths you have, yes, you're going to harness, yes, there's going to be continuity, but there's also a lot of new stuff to learn, and that you don't even know yet who you're going to learn it from. So some on the MA I learned certainly from some extraordinary tutors, but a lot I learned from fellow writers on the programme. So, yeah.
So I guess my final question for you both is really, for us as a community of Sloans here, how did the programme help you in your transition, and what advice would you give? Probably, you know, we've got a lot of 2015, 16, 17, 18 cohorts here today, so groups that are starting on that path of rethinking their careers. What advice would you give us? Again, shall I start with Valeria? Because Gillian's scrawling a note, so I'll let her do that.
No.
I'd say consider what your underlying constants are. So for me, the underlying constants were, on the one hand, this mixture of creative and structured thinking, that when I looked back on what I had done, always I recognized as a constant. Another one was the arts. I was actually born in a family where the arts are very, very important. My mother is an art historian, my father is an art dealer, and I trained as a musician always. So those were constants. So on the one hand, it's your innate aptitude. On the other hand, it's things you're passionate about. And then I'd say, remember what the Sloan Programme might have taught you actually about your psychological profile. So I'd like to go back to something the Dean said very early on. You know how he said you have to listen to the external world, you have to listen to teams, and you have to listen to yourself. And I'd say Sloan is amazing in showing you how you function, in helping you listen to yourself, like very few programs, because it really puts the spotlight on how you can function in teams, how you can function towards that external world by knowing yourself. And indeed, this goes back to Socratic thinking and so forth. But I'd say that is an amazing differentiator of the Sloan Programme because of when people do it in their life trajectory, in their career trajectory. And for me, that knowledge actually gave me the courage to leave the world of business and decide to embark on a second career in the literary sphere, because I really knew and was comfortable with how my profile really fitted that at a very deep level. So.
Thank you. And Gillian, what advice would you give us, and how did the programme help?
Well, I think the big differentiator between the Sloan Programme and an MBA or other business qualifications is the focus on leadership. And the big learning I got from Sloan is that leadership is just about followship. It's about people wanting to follow you. And people want to follow you if they like you and they respect you. And fundamentally, they were big things that I saw I changed about myself. I started to think of leadership, and this is even when I was going back into the corporate world, as, you know, my main job actually was to motivate people who were working for me so that they leapt out of bed in the morning and couldn't wait to get into work to do whatever it was we were going to do. And once you recognize that, you recognize, you know, how you're going to harness the power of people, and that's whether to come out when it's raining to campaign for you, or to go to the ends of the earth for you know, whatever it is you need to do, you know, the extra mile to ensure your business success, to vote for you. So all of those things actually came about that focus on leadership. And that's one of the things I fundamentally think is changed about how I saw leadership and how I saw my role as a leader. I think the second thing is you can always do what you've done before. So whatever you did on the Sloan Programme before, you can always do. And you've proven that already, and you can always continue to do it and go up further. But you've come out of Sloan with much more than that, which you can use if you're brave enough and when the circumstances are right to try something different, if that's the way you know, your life takes you, or that's what you feel like doing. And actually, politics is a brutal business, and all political careers end in failure by design. So I am pretty sure that my resilience that I've learned and the battle scars through failure will be even more required in the future than in the past. But then I shall look forward like Lord Burns there to doing my third career and seeing whatever that is.
I thank you both so much for some of those different sorts of insights. And what I find fascinating is they're two completely different transitions, and yet there are such common traits around an openness to different things, a preparedness to learn, a sticking at it, and
actually to start at the bottom again as well. Mm-hmm. That humility to start at the bottom again.
And it's taken you both quite a lot of time. You know, it looks fabulous sitting back, looking back at it now, but some of that route along the way must have been quite hard. I think we've possibly got time for one or two questions, if you want to put them up for us. How important have mentors or sponsors been to you, and how are you paying this back? Which one would like to answer that first?
Well, I mean, absolutely key. So Baroness Anne Jenkin was, you know, the first person I met, and then she mentored me and helped me navigate my way through this world that I really didn't know how it worked, and it does work very differently. So, you know, that was absolutely key. How I pay it back, I mean, I do everything she asked me to do. I speak at every event. I go to every end of the corner of the country. I do, you know, I mentor every woman she asked me to. I meet with every aspiring politician from wherever they are across the country. And you know, I speak at a lot of events where, you know, women are thinking of entering into political office, and not just being a politician, but other political officers as well. I mean, even some of the, I mean, somebody mentioned Ofcom or some of the, you know, regulatory bodies, they are public appointments, and we need more women going into those as well. So I go around the country with her, trying to encourage more women to step forward.
Payback time.
Yes.
and Valeria.
Right. No, it's a very, very good question. Mentors for me in this second career have been very, very important indeed. And particularly because, you know, what I found was that in business, there was almost a more objective way of knowing whether what I was doing had merit. Whereas with fiction, as the writer, well, writers divide into two camps. So there's the ones who are, you know, sure of their own genius and lucky them, you know, and then there's the ones who think like, is anyone going to be interested in reading the stuff I'm writing, you know? And I pretty obviously fall into that second camp. So to have two mentors in particular, two tutors at Goldsmiths. So it's again part of the University of London. I seem to have a subscription to the University of London, you'll gather. You know, two of them who were unbelievable, and well after the MA continued supporting me with feedback, in one case with a fabulous endorsement, and you're talking, you know, Booker Prize shortlisted authors. So it's, you know, when you're starting out, it's terribly important to have people like that to give you that practical help, but above all, to sustain you in your self-belief, I found, because, as I say, you have no real objective way of knowing whether your writing is going to be any good or of interest. So.
Thank you very much, ladies, and thank you so much for your insight.